If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and you'll be notified as I add more content. Also hit the like button and post your comments as to how I might improve the presentation. The Haunted House by Ernest Rigby. This story harks back to the time when I opened a moving company in Sydney, Australia. It really happened the way I describe it, so keep an open mind and take from it what you like. One autumn day I was working in my office when the telephone rang, and I picked it up. The voice on the other end was high-pitched, and I assumed it was a woman. That was the first of many wrong assumptions I would be making, not only on that day, but in the days that followed. "I need someone to come and move all my stuff into storage," the voice shrieked. I picked up my pen and asked, "How much furniture do you have to move into storage, madam?" "I'm not a madam," the voice began. "I'm a mister, a doctor even. You could call me Ron. I have a high-pitched voice," he continued. "There's a lot of stuff to move, and you had better come and have a look, but I want to warn you now. We had a break-in some time ago, and we haven't gotten around to cleaning it up yet." I wasn't worried about a little bit of untidiness. I had seen everything, or so I thought. I made the arrangements and proceeded to his home in Strathfield, New South Wales, later that day. What happened next should have set off alarm bells inside my head, but I was young and naive in the ways of the world, and it didn't. The house was a dilapidated old weatherboard home, built sometime between 1900 and 1910. It had once been painted white, but that was all flaking. Like the rest of the house, the windows had a thick coating of dust and cobwebs, while the garden was overgrown with waist-high grass and weeds. The client matched the house, and as he emerged from his battered 1967 Datsun car, I was able to take a good look at him. He was about 65 years of age, small built and of medium height, slightly balding grey hair, a white, pasty face, and a week's beard growth. He had thin, distinctive, bloodless lips. He was wearing the baggiest old pair of slacks, which was shiny with wear and crumpled. He had on a cardigan, as ancient as he was. It was stretched in some places and shrunken in others. I introduced myself, and he began to tell me a little of his story. He said the house had been broken into a long time ago, and it had upset him so much that he couldn't bear to go inside. "Everything has been vandalised and trashed," he said. "I can't even stand to be here outside. I don't want to go inside. Could you please take the key and go and have a look?" I took the key while he stood outside. I was shocked when I opened the door. The house was even messier than I could have imagined. It didn't smell like a dirty house because, apart from dust and spider webs, there was stuff placed high on the floor, 2 feet in some places and 1 foot high in others. But what was it? That was the shocking part. There were moulds for false teeth, old dentures, old spectacles, and all sorts of ancient medical equipment. There were breast pumps, tourniquets, and test tubes that went crunch under my feet. Retractors and protractors, scalpels and saws. Everything you would need for a torture chamber. Add to this old clothing from the turn of the 1900s, books of every sort and description, and various photographic equipment, including cameras, black and white developing baths, and papers. The more I explored, the more I found. Someone had painted a satanic star on a wall, and there was food in the cupboards, which was all perfectly preserved, but the use-by dates were 10 years ago. There were a couple of calendars which were also from 10 years ago. The most surprising thing was that although the food was lying around, there was no evidence of insects or rodents. Any insects I saw, including the builders of the cobwebs, had all died long ago, and so I continued to crunch my way around, as I made up my mind to charge more than he could pay, so perhaps he wouldn't be calling me back. I went outside, and there he was waiting. I told him it would cost at least $10,000 to do this job, and that the storage would be hundreds of dollars a week, and perhaps he should just call it an excavator and take it and the house to the dump. "No," he said. "Can you come and do the job next week? I'd like you to do it for me, please." What could I say? Greed began to take over, and I started planning my strategy. I filled in the contract which he signed before I shook his limp and scrawny hand and took my leave. And so I got my two best men, and I began to give the most inspirational pep talk that any coach had contemplated before or since. I told them that the company that had always been kind to them, the one that sometimes overlooked their transgressions and paid their wages for all of these years, was now in need of something in return. It was time to pay the piper, I said. All those favours over the years could now be repaid in one foul swoop. Did I really say foul? I told them there was a house in Strathfield, not the tidiest I had ever seen, but it needed to have its contents packed and moved into the store. It would take men who possessed special skills, stamina, and, dare I say it, even courage. The challenges that face the people who carry out this job are significant, but the rewards of knowing that a difficult job has been accomplished cannot be measured. These challenges, I went on, are far too great for you to bear on your own, so I'll even be accompanying you to keep your spirits up. They were positively beaming until I told them to throw in 3 shovels, 3 hard-bristled yard brooms, and a packet of 100 garbage bags, together with the 3 sets of gardening gloves and overalls that I had bought. They started to get really edgy until I reminded them that I wouldn't be asking them to do anything I wasn't prepared to do. "And stop being a pair of babies," I said. We had an entire week to get this job completed, as the client wasn't being pushed to get out, and he wasn't living there anyway. Apart from handing over the key at the start of the job, he said he would try to pop around in a few days to see how we were going. There were some delays in us getting from the depot. First of all was the pep talk, the search for the equipment, then a couple of urgent phone calls. It seemed like everything was plotting to stop us from getting to the job, but eventually, like all things, we finally arrived. Our client was there waiting for us patiently in his battered old car. He was wearing the same faded white shirt, grubby cardigan, worn-out trousers and shoes that he had worn the first time that I met him, which wasn't surprising. After I took the key and unlocked the door, I turned around, and he had already driven away, silently, as if he hadn't really been there at all. I opened the door, and all 3 of us gasped. What a terrible mess! And I groaned as I saw the expression of bewilderment on my 2 movers. We took the cartons, shovels, gloves, and other equipment out of the truck, propped the screen door open with some empty cartons, and propped the main door similarly. I told Shane to start in the kitchen and John to start in the lounge. I began at the front door and steadily worked my way to the bedroom. The distance from the front door to the entrance of the main bedroom was 1 yard. The distance from the doorway to the corner of the big double bed was less than 2 yards, and it took me over 2 hours to pack my way to the point where I could pull the blankets off the bed. When I did, what I saw and what I was already feeling made my legs go weak at the knees, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. There was the noticeable impression of a human on the bed, and there was the faint smell of death in the air. Add to this the 6 Bibles, which were all opened up to the 23rd Psalm, and you could forgive me for feeling a little spooked. The blankets and sheets disintegrated as I held them. After a while, I was able to regain my composure, and I resumed my packing. While I was doing this, I was frequently leaving and entering the house through the front door, which kept closing and locking behind me. This was despite the many cartons I placed against it. As a result, I was always banging on the door for one of the others to let me back in. Likewise, the same thing happened to them when they went outside, and it seemed that something was trying to stop us from doing our work. The many documents and paraphernalia around offered up informative clues as to my client and his family's former lives at this place, and it seems he was a dentist before becoming a doctor. A death certificate I found stated that his mother had died 10 years ago at this place, and she was 83 at the time. Him being a dentist explained all the false teeth and jaw impressions that were lying around the floor. During the next few days, we saw the neighbours frequently crossing the road when they got to our client's house. It looked like they would instead do this rather than walk past the house. So when I found the opportunity, I spoke with the lady who lived next door. I asked if she could shed any light on my client, and she told me that he had nursed his mother at home for years until she died. He'd always been close to her and went a little further off the rails due to her death. It had scarred him, and he eventually stopped coming home. From there onwards, she would only see him every couple of months when he came to collect his mail. She said he had always been a little odd, but the house seemed to have taken on a life of its own. She said that the paintwork began to crack and fade over the years. The gardens overgrew, and the house slowly took on an ominous presence. She also said the house gave her a cold shudder just walking past it. Other people she knew felt the same way, and even the postman who had to approach the mailbox always quickened his pace when he had to do a delivery. Back inside, I found Masonic aprons and other things that proclaimed our client's father to have once been a Grand Master of the United Order of Oddfellows and a university professor. There were hundreds of First World War postcards and letters with photographs and equipment. One of the Bibles is a colossal tome weighing in it around 4 kilos, dating to before 1850. I alluded previously to a smell of death that I experienced when I pulled the bed sheets back, but this quickly dissipated, and I can honestly say there was no smell in this house. It was totally neutral in that regard. There was something else, though, something more subtle than anything you could smell or touch. There was an overwhelming feeling of despair that seemed to envelop anything inside into its clutches. It only worked while we were inside, and once we went out, the sun shone and the air was sweet once more until you went back inside. By now it was getting late, the sun was disappearing, and without electricity, we called it a day at the house and left. We drove off, and the journey back to the depot was made in silence. There was nothing to say, but plenty for each of us to think about. When we arrived at the depot, we put the truck away and sat down to glasses of bourbon. We started to talk, tentatively at first, as though each not wanting the other to know of the fear that we felt. Then the ice was broken, and it all came flooding back. "There's no way in the world I'm returning to that place," Shane said with force. "My thoughts exactly," said John. "You can sack me if you want, I don't care. Just don't ask me to return to that evil place again," John said. "Come on, you pair of wimps," I said, trying to make light of my own fears. "What are you two blokes, a pair of gutless bastards, or are you going to behave like men?" After a bit more of these jibes, they finally agreed to go back the next day. When I told them that unfortunately I couldn't go, I thought they would beat me with the whiskey bottle, but they still agreed, and the next day they went. The following is what they told me happened. I wasn't there, but I believe every word. They arrived at 9 a.m. and proceeded to start where we had left off the day before. In addition to everything I've already said, there was a telephone in the house with a rotary dial. It was not connected, but every time you walked past it, the bells would jingle a little. I picked it up a few times, but the line was dead. At around 12 noon, Shane was packing up the kitchen when he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He turned around quickly and screamed when he saw it was the client, who had somehow summoned up the courage to enter the house. "What the hell are you trying to do?" Shane said. "You've frightened the life out of me." "I'm sorry," said the client. "I knocked on the door, but you didn't hear me. I just wanted to tell you not to be scared when you opened the case under the bed in the spare room. There's a skeleton in it. But don't worry, I'm a doctor, and I used to use it for study." Now John, who had been packing up the room, went white as he ran back into the room, followed closely by Shane. They lifted the single bed and removed the case from underneath before opening it. Of course, the client was right, and they both cursed and ran out of the house. The client, in the meantime, disappeared as quickly as he had arrived. After several cigarettes, they summoned the courage to re-enter the house. When they looked into the spare bedroom, the case was back under the bed, which had been returned to its original position. Not surprisingly, they didn't do too much work that day and returned early to the depot, whereupon they proceeded to animatedly regale me with this tale. I had to break out another bottle of bourbon to settle their nerves. Again they protested that they wouldn't go back there, and no amount of bullying from me would change their minds. I had to change my tack, and so I began. "Come on, fellows. You've accomplished so much in such a short time. You can't give up now. You have to see it through. If you do nothing else in your lives, do this, and I can guarantee you will have stories for your grandchildren." I was starting to win, but it needed more. "Okay," I said, "I'll go with you and hold your hands. Whatever happens, I'll be with you." That was it. They agreed, and the following morning we started out on the long and quiet drive to what we all now referred to as the haunted house. The 20-minute drive seemed to take forever. At some time my mind went into daydream mode, and I didn't come out of it until we arrived over an hour later. The house was waiting for us, old, weather-beaten, dusty, and highly uninviting. When we started working, we were like machines, silently doing our jobs, and eventually we were near the end. I was in one bedroom, Shane was in another, and John in the garage. I thought I'd have a bit of fun, so I started banging on the wall and moaning. After a while there was banging from the other side of the wall, and thinking that Shane was on to my little joke, I went to investigate. But this was when I saw that Shane was outside in the garage talking to John. I walked outside to speak with them, and as I was making my way through the very long grass, my foot became tangled in what I thought was a clump of weeds. I kicked hard, and to the horror of everyone, an entire wet and slimy dog skeleton went sailing through the air. That was it for me, and I suspect it was for them too. I called out to them and told them to get into the truck. I didn't have to ask twice. We had all had enough, and we were going. The little bit of cleaning up that remained, well, the client could do that himself. If he really existed, of course, because I was beginning to doubt that. I didn't know how to contact him. I knew that what we had in store was of very little value. I was about to chalk up another bad decision down to experience, when one day, out of the blue, he sent me a check for the total amount, together with a letter that, for the life of me, I couldn't understand. Fortunately, there was a telephone number, and I rang him. "What does this letter say?" I asked him. "Get rid of all the stuff," he said. "Do it as quick as you can, please." "I'll have to have written instructions," I said. "Instructions that you have to give need to be clear and concise, as well as legibly written, so that if there is a problem later, I can't be held responsible." "Okay," he said. "I'll send another letter, and I'll write it clearer." A couple of weeks passed, and I didn't hear from him. I got a couple of visitors instead. A massive woman with an overbearing personality and her hen-pecked husband came to see me. They introduced themselves as my client's landlord. They said that my client was ill, and he had told them a little of what had transpired in recent months. They told me that they'd taken him in as a boarder 10 years ago and watched him descend to the point where he no longer changed his clothes. They say that he has some peculiar habits. He'd go out every morning and buy a writing pad, some coloured pencils and other bits of stationery, and when he arrived home he would put the plastic bag with all of this on his bedroom floor. The next day he would go out and buy the same little things until there would eventually be hundreds of little plastic shopping bags. I took them back to the shop he purchased them from, and they were resold to him. She moved on then to the purpose of her visit. She was aware that he was in the process of making arrangements to get rid of all his furniture and effects, and she wondered if it might be possible for her to have them. Apparently she thought there were some things of value among them. So I began to tell her what had transpired during the move, how unusual things had happened. I also told her about a few strange things that had happened at our warehouse since the goods were in storage. The storeman had threatened to quit. He said the whole place was freezing now, even in the middle of spring when the temperature was in the 90s. He said he had to put on extra clothing to go inside. He also complained of strange noises, doors opening and closing of their own volition, and how he would never need a pest exterminator again. This was a bit shocking, he said. He said that an entire family of mice had dropped dead alongside the consignment, and there were no longer any living insects in the place. The more I told her, the more she shuddered until she became visibly alarmed. She got up and said that perhaps it would be better for me to dispose of the goods, and she bade me good day. Eventually, I did receive instructions from the client, and I got rid of the consignment. But there are a few things I haven't been able to get rid of. I kept the colossal Bible and a few hundred First World War postcards. As for the client, I don't know what happened to him. A colleague I told the story to said that he had seen him in a nursing home. When I asked how he knew it was him, he said that my description of him was all he needed, and he proved it by telling me his name. You have been listening to The Haunted House, written and narrated by myself, Ernest Rigby. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you'd like to be kept up to date about future episodes, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Feel free to comment below as to how I might improve my work. Cheerio for now, and thank you.